We are starting with the planning session. Once again, a warm welcome to all the delegates, participants, and the attendees. Myself, Dr. Padma Rao, Dean, Prague College of Pharmaceutical Sciences, will be the moderator for the first session. We have two speakers for this session. One of the speakers will be talking on practice-related aspect, and the other speaker will be talking on pharmaceutical sciences with the advances in technology. I am very happy to welcome the first speaker of today's session, Dr. Reginald Paul Sequeira, currently a professor in the Department of Pharmacology and Therapeutics, College of Medicine and Medical Sciences, Arabian Gulf University, Bahrain. He has more than 40 years of experience both in teaching and research. His association with Arabian Gulf University, Bahrain is more than 36 years. He has several publications in the form of book chapters, review articles, original research articles, editorials, etc. He is also a reviewer for many journals, just to mention a few: Academic Medicine, Archives of Medical Research, European Journal of Medical Research, and he has won many awards during the academic journey, such as International Society of Pharmacovigilance, Teacher Excellence, Long Services, etc. So more than all these, he is one of our very close friends, knowing him for more than 40 years. I am very happy to present Dr. Sequeira, and he will be delivering his talk on patient safety in health professional education. Thank you and welcome, Dr. Sequeira. Over to you. The podium is open for you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Padma Rao. It brings me some very fond memories of many years ago when we started the career together back in India. And I'm very grateful for extending an invitation to me for participating in this very important conference. The importance of this conference become extra important, particularly in times of COVID-19 pandemic. The theme of this conference, I think, is a perfect fit for the ongoing health situation throughout the world. I was given a total flexibility in deciding the topic for today's presentation, and I thought that what would be the most appropriate pointer? What is the most appropriate theme for today's talk, which cuts across, I think, the different specialties such as medicine, pharmacy, nursing, dentistry, and allied sciences. And what is better than patient safety in health professional education? And I thought that since it is a very broad topic, to narrow it down to today's theme, I thought that medication error is a very appropriate topic. Now, to begin with, the guiding principle of any healthcare intervention is to do good and to avoid doing any harm to a patient. That's a very altruistic philosophy which guides the healthcare profession. An important determinant of patient safety is medication safety. And indeed, it is one of the key elements of patient safety. Now, we all know that there is an ever-expanding list of prescription medications and probably a plethora of drug formulations. And adding to this complex situation, we also have OTC medications, over-the-counter type of medications, which makes, I think, the task for any healthcare professional somewhat, it is a daunting task to keep track of all these ever-expanding new medications. And we all are aware, I think research has shown over the last several decades that several thousand people die or suffer worldwide as a consequence of medication errors. So the safety of any drug therapy, it is not only related to the research and development arena, it is also ultimately influenced by, the usage in the context of treating a patient. The healthcare related cost to medication errors, for example, in the US alone, it has been estimated to be in excess of $50 billion per year. Now, that is where I think we need to look at this issue of medication error, the magnitude of the problem, and what are the different types, etc. Now, to begin with, I think for today's presentation, I'm expecting the following topics to be addressed, and let us move on to it's not moving. Okay, here we are. This is a diagrammatic illustration of the different determinants of patient safety, because when we are looking at medication safety, we have to look in terms of the totality of other determinants which influence the patient safety. These are the 9 different dimensions identified by the World Health Organization as the elements of patient safety, and one of the most important component of patient safety is the medication safety. And of course, I think a cursorial look at this diagram will make you clearly comprehend that medication safety is related to several things like communication skills, infection control, health system, quality of life, so on and so forth. And medical legal practice is something very critical in this context, because the consequence of violating the patient safety due to medication related injury or harm is acquiring a very, very huge magnitude. Now, it is very important, I think, at the outset, and I would like to spend a minute on the different definitions of medication error. One of the perhaps I think best known definition of medication error is by Ferner and Aronson, the pioneers in this field, who defined medication error as a failure in the treatment process that leads to or has the potential to lead to harm to the patient. I want you to focus on this aspect, not necessarily that it has led to a harm, but it has a potential to lead to. Both are implied in terms of medication error. Now, that is something very critical to keep in mind, that the overall scope of medication error is much, much broader in terms of medical legal definition. Then, realizing that this has limitation, operational limitations, Runciman, a few years later, he modified, essentially keeping the same element, but he said the 2 different elements were introduced. One was the act of omission or act of commission. So the medication error was given a little bit more clear focus, implying that by what you did as a healthcare professional, the prescriber typically, or what was missed you should have done, but it was not done, both can lead to a failure in the drug treatment process, and that is also brought under the definition of medication error. Now, again, to make it more user-friendly, the definition was adopted by Williams that any error in the prescribing, dispensing, or administration of a drug, irrespective of whether such error led to adverse consequences or not. Now, this is where I think the epidemiological data on medication error is a little confusing, and partly that is because the different researchers who have published their data, they have used different definitions, and that is where I think sometimes the comparison becomes somewhat hard and perhaps I think misleading. unless I think the definition is made explicit for comparison purpose. Another aspect here is that prescribing, dispensing, or administration. These are the three pillars involved in drug therapy. Prescribing, most often the prescribing privilege is limited to a physician, dispensing to the pharmacist, and drug administration in a hospital setting, it is mostly to the nursing personnel, but in a home setting, it could be a healthcare provider, the individual patient, as well as the other, healthcare personnel, depending on the context of the drug therapy. And that is where medication errors sometimes are classified as prescribing related medication errors, dispensing related medication errors, and drug administration related medication errors. Okay, this is some interesting data. It is almost 15 years back. It was based on US data. It was recognized that the most common medication error is related to the drug dosage, almost 40%, in excess of 40%. And in a descending order, then we have choice of wrong medication, as well as administering the drug by different an inappropriate route. More important is, of all medication errors, somewhere between 1 to 2% of the errors are serious. Now, the definition of a serious error is a permanent or irreversible injury and potentially even death, because there cannot be anything more serious than the drug-related injury resulting in death. This is another diagrammatic illustration to bring in different elements of adverse drug event and adverse drug reaction. The big circle in red, it represents the medication error. And of course, first of all, I want you to appreciate that only a small fraction of medication errors actually result in potential adverse drug events. In contrast, let's look at this circle. Some of these adverse drug events resulting from medication errors, they are preventable, but not all of them. In contrast, other adverse reactions, they do happen because they happen in therapeutic doses, but you can minimize the severity by appropriate measures. And it is only a smaller proportion of the adverse drug reactions. They are severe, and I have defined what is severe adverse drug reaction, although the explanation for severity is quite variable, because from the victim's perspective as well as from a healthcare perspective, what is severity and ultimately how it is interpreted by law, it might be a little tangential. Now, drug prescribing error, like what I said earlier, prescription is usually the privilege of a physician, and in some countries, the nurses are also allowed to prescribe, typically in the United States, at least for certain healthcare settings as well as situations. And the different elements of prescribing errors could be omission error, commission error, and integration error. When a prescriber is writing a prescription, you have a clearly defined therapeutic goal. Now, by skipping in the prescription certain elements of the prescription, it could lead to omission error. Now, by committing to certain errors, that again can contribute to the poor quality of a prescription. But I think more important is the integration error. When a physician is writing a prescription, he is integrating the information related to the patient, related to the disease or a health condition he is treating, as well as information related to the medication that he is going to prescribe. Now, this is where the knowledge about pharmacology, especially clinical pharmacology and therapeutics, come into picture. And it has been recognized by different regulatory bodies like LCME, and much even before that, even GMC in UK, they recognize that there should be more explicit focus on clinical pharmacology teaching in medical schools, because the graduating physicians usually are not fully competent in terms of the prescribing competency. And that is where I think there has been considerable, reforms in terms of different curricular approaches for enhancing this particular aspect in medical school curricula. And I'm sure the same thing also need to be expanded in other healthcare professions. Now, the incorrect dosage selection, which constitute almost 40% of the prescribing errors, it could be related to the dose, quantity, or an indication, or prescribing a contraindicated medication to a given patient. And because it usually is a reflection of lack of knowledge about the prescribed drug, it is sometimes referred to as planning error. And other contributing factors which are well recognized, I think physicians are well known for their illegible handwriting, and perhaps I think the computer printed prescriptions to a larger extent have minimized, at least in more advanced countries, such factors contributing to errors. Another important thing is not bothering to take complete medication history from a patient, and that is where maybe the workload of a physician also may be coming into picture, confusion with the drug names, use of decimal points in an inappropriate way, confusing abbreviation and verbal orders. These all have been well recognized as contributing factors to prescribing errors. Now, what about the level of training of a physician? Normally, we consider that a very experienced physician is, very unlikely. That is true. But a study from UK somewhat gave some very interesting insight. This hospital-based study in UK involving large number of data, prescription data, it demonstrated that almost 8.9% of prescriptions had an error. Now, this is showing the distribution of errors committed by different stages of training, from first year residents, foundation residents, all the way to consultant. Even consultants can make the mistakes. Okay, and also I want you to pay some attention to this. Of all the prescriptions, 1.7% of the prescriptions had lethal error, which was detected either by the pharmacist or the nurses. I think this is another very important, that the ultimate safety of drug usage, and in terms of preventing the errors, it is a joint responsibility of all these three parties. These are some of the, I think, recommendations made to minimize prescribing errors. Changes to clinical working environment. Clinicians are very busy, particularly in certain settings like accident and emergency. And the workload also contributes to the stress and inadvertent sort of chances of making mistakes. Undergraduate educational reforms, and this is where I think there is considerable stress on innovative medical curricula, whether they are one or other forms of integrated curricula, such as problem-based learning, which we at Arabian Gulf University, we have adopted from inception, and other schools, they are moving towards case-based learning or some other form of integrated curricula. Postgraduate education reform is also required in addition to undergraduate reforms, putting explicit focus in terms of the drug therapy related elements, more especially so in general practice or family practice. There is a need for continuing professional education, and also perhaps one of the best methods to minimize the error would be, at least in primary care, better to stick to standard treatment guidelines. and others have suggested the need to carry out periodic therapeutic audits and ultimately to nurture the safety culture as well as an awareness. Drug dispensing errors, they are either, this is mostly at the level of pharmacist, the transcribing errors, or the similarity between the drug names that is creating confusion, not uncommonly. I think this is some examples where, the confusion between the different brand names. One good example is between Lasix and Losec. They sound alike. It could be also confusing between a generic drug and a brand name. At times, adding to the confusion, look here, it is not only similar sounding medications, even the dosage in each tablet is comparable. And you can imagine how any such error at a dispensing level, what sort of consequence it can result in. Now, at a drug dispensing level, the recommended approaches to minimize errors, as I mentioned earlier, the computerized system is to be encouraged. And also, let us not forget the stress on WHO essential medicines list. Professor G.M. Rao, in his opening remarks, he stressed the cost of healthcare, the spiraling cost of medications. And this is where I think there is enormous merit in promoting the essential medicines list. If I'm not mistaken, the most recent list, which is dating back to 2019, it has got 433 essential medications, which are divided into core list as well as the complementary list, which are more specifically kept for specialists. Generic prescribing is another way of reducing errors, and also I am sure in most instances it will be less expensive. Optimizing workload of dispensing pharmacists, particularly for those who are working on night shifts and long working hours, it can also contribute to the errors, and quality management has also been recommended. Drug administration error, it is most often seen in a hospital setting, and the people responsible for this usually are the nursing staff or junior doctors. Again, I would like to stress the importance of rule of 5, which means right dose given of the right drug to a right patient at the right time and by the right route of administration. Any one of these elements, when it is violated, it can result in errors, and that can compromise patient safety. It is well recognized that IV route is most often prone for errors, and availability of drugs in different strengths very often look alike or in combination with other medications can also be the contributing factors. Now, these are some of the recommendations made how to minimize errors at the drug administration level, and check the patient identity, make sure that the right drug is given to the right patient, and ensuring the correct dosage calculation. And this is another source of error made in calculating the dosage, and ensuring that prescription, the drug, and the patient are at the same place. There have been, and minimizing interruptions during the drug rounds. I think Huckels and Baumgart, I think she published a fantastic study, a PhD thesis work in Switzerland, where they looked at, I think, minimizing interruptions in a hospital setting during the drug rounds by the nurses, how it can be modified to minimize what sort of interventions can be introduced to minimize the medication errors in nursing practice. Now, these are the most vulnerable patient populations susceptible for medication errors. Needless to say, older individuals, because of the polypharmacy and age-related cognitive decline, also is not uncommonly responsible for the medication errors. Patients with renal insufficiency, for obvious reason, that they principal route of elimination of drugs or their metabolite is the kidney, and people with the low renal reserve are more vulnerable. Infants and children, because of the developmental stage in the life cycle, accident and emergency care setting patients, and HIV infected patients. These are well recognized that are the subgroups of patient populations who are recognized to be victims of medication errors. And just as a concluding remark here, this is a Swiss cheese model. Many of you may be very fond of Swiss cheese. And when you look at a slice of Swiss cheese, there are these holes. Now, let us look at, I think, this is what is called as the system related error and how to interpret it. Let's say this is the prescriber and this is the dispenser and this is the person who is responsible for administering the medication. Doctor, pharmacist, and nurse. If a mistake has happened at one level, it can be picked up at another intermediary step. Even if this has missed, probably it can be picked up at this level. But when these barriers are broken, for example, diagrammatically it is illustrated here that an error can go unnoticed, unchecked, and that can result in an adverse effect. And this Swiss cheese model was proposed by James Reason long ago for understanding and minimizing industrial accidents, and it has been very successfully adopted for analyzing medication errors as well. Also, I would like to stress the importance of research and educational opportunities in this area. One is related to pharmacovigilance. You are all familiar, and I'm sure in the deliberation of this conference, somebody will focus on the importance of pharmacovigilance, therapeutic audit, and prescription audit. We have been doing a fair amount of work in these areas here in Bahrain, and case-based studies is another approach. And without belaboring much, this is one of the case study which we give to the students here in our medical school. This is about anaphylactic shock, and we ask them to work in small groups, team-based learning, and then we ask them to summarize for each of these cases, using this template, how do you analyze about these medication errors. And this is one of the very practical way of introducing the theme of medication errors and safety dimensions in various health profession curricula. And these are some of the references. And this is the final slide of my presentation. First of all, Institute of Medicine in year 2000, proposed this very famous statement: to err is human. When a mistake has happened, when an error has happened, the healthcare system should never attempt to hide it and camouflage. I think there should be transparency in reporting critical incidents. And lastly, again, a very optimistic note: we cannot change the human condition, but we can change the conditions under which humans work. And thank you very much for your listening to this presentation. And if you have any quick comment, question, I will be quite happy to respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sequeira, for your very informative talk, which is actually the need of the hour, and what is very practical for all healthcare professionals. And your explanation with the case presentation was more informative. Now, we cannot see any questions from the audience side. Now, just one question from my side, Dr. Sequeira.
Yes.
What is the percentage of different medication errors which happens with your experiences in the hospitals where you are all working?
Okay, the hospital-based errors are very few. In fact, maximum errors, quite unfortunately, are prescribing errors, and more so in primary care rather than in secondary tertiary care. Our focus has been more in terms of primary case-based research, but even in terms of hospital-based medication errors, I think there are a a little bit barriers for doing research, because you need access to the individual patient charts, and when there is an error, usually there is a reluctance to give access to these errors for research purposes because of the fear of litigations.
Okay, thank you. And also want to just check with you, what is the acceptance of clinical pharmacists or clinical pharmacologists during interventions related to different medication errors?
Okay, thank you very much. That's a very apt and relevant question to the theme of the conference. Yeah, clinical pharmacy, as we all realize, it emerged and has been very successful and integrated into the healthcare system in North America, especially in the United States. In most of the drug rounds, and along with the treating physician, there is a clinical pharmacist who has got advanced training in the specialty in which the person is affiliated with a clinician. For example, a clinical pharmacist who is having a specialist knowledge in oncology will be with the oncology team, and somebody in cardiovascular medicine with cardiovascular team. Now, clinical pharmacy, I think it has not made very impressive inroads, particularly in Europe. And partly the reason for that is the definition of clinical pharmacology is somewhat different in most of the European countries. It is implied that unless somebody is a medical graduate, they cannot be the clinical pharmacologist. Unlike the United States model, where you don't need to be essentially a physician by training in order to be a clinical pharmacologist. Now, as far as clinical pharmacy is concerned, there are very few countries which are offering clinical pharmacy programs internationally. And I'm delighted that your school in Ras Al Khaimah is one such pioneer. And perhaps there is one in Saudi Arabia, in Riyadh, the Faculty of Pharmacy. They are also offering clinical pharmacy. This is an area which is a dire need for the future. And with the passage of time, I think there will be better acceptance of clinical pharmacy as a specialty and acceptance of clinical pharmacists as team members who are contributing to the quality of drug therapy and minimizing the errors in a hospital setting. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Dr. Sequeira, there are a few questions from the audience.
Okay.
Just what are the problems that usually happen in terms of medication errors, especially in pediatrics and geriatrics?
Okay, let's start at the two ends of the spectrum, in pediatric and geriatric. Needless to say, the pediatric population is more vulnerable to drug toxicity of any type. Now, within pediatric population, you need to stratify them as neonates, infants, and then children. I think the biggest concern is in premature neonates as well as in the neonatal period, because during that time, both the drug biotransformation ability of the liver as well as drug elimination mechanisms or systems of the kidney are not fully developed and mature. So the vulnerable area is one of the important area for research would be the pediatric and neonatal intensive care units. And I think our department is very actively involved in looking at, I think, particularly the selected classes of antibiotics and other drugs used in critical care in PICU and NICU. Moving to the geriatric population, of course, there are several, I think, generic remarks I would like to make here. It is expected that with the increase in life expectancy, more and more number of people in the geriatric segment. Of course, please recollect, I think the definition of the older individual, in fact, again, in North America, the term elderly carries some stigma because it is very it is a reflection of ageism. So I will use the word older individuals. Who is an older individual? Let's apply the WHO concept. 65 and above and less than 75 is young elderly. Sounds paradoxical, young elderly. And then those who are above 75 who are elderly. Now, it is logical that the elderly, the real senior citizens are more susceptible because of a variety of reasons. Number one, age-related multiple, health disorders, which require multiple medications, resulting in polypharmacy and drug interactions, which are compromising the drug therapy quality. Also, like what I stated earlier, with advancing age, poor eyesight or cognitive decline, all that can affect, I think, compliance to drug therapy or mistakes in taking a medication. For example, if a diuretic which is prescribed to be taken in the morning, by confusion, the patient is taking at night, what sort of, quality of life compromise will be there for such a patient. Falls and fractures because of orthostatic hypotension. Again, surprisingly, is under-recognized to what extent the drug-related orthostatic hypotension has contributed to such falls in the elderly. And it can be disastrous, resulting in fractures. Of course, there are situations where the adverse effects are not completely avoidable, but I think that is where I think optimizing the therapy. And another important thing I would like to stress here is in the elderly, when a prescription, when some drug is prescribed, it is important also to review when to stop it. Because when patients are seen by multiple healthcare providers, and each person based on their specialty is prescribing, it is not uncommon that the drug interaction or what other medication the person is already taking has not been fully appreciated and addressed. And that's where I think having a personal physician from general practice and drug referral in terms of specialty is perhaps a better model for minimizing medication related errors in the elderly. I hope I have answered that question. Is there any other question or do I have time?
No, there is actually one more question. There are questions, but due to lack of time,
Okay.
there will be one more questions.
Okay, all right.
This is one of the delegate.
Okay.
One doubt that nowadays we are hearing the term discrepancies, how it is different from medication error.
Okay, discrepancy is, I think it is a nice, legal framework to evade responsibility. Like for example, the various guidelines, take any guideline for treating a disease, hypertension, for example. Take American Hypertension Society guideline, American College of Cardiology guideline, and then WHO guidelines, International Society of Hypertension guideline. Now, there is a fair degree of congruence, but in terms of some specifics, the guidelines might vary from one guideline to the other. And under those circumstances, it might be treated as a sort of a discrepancy in recommendation. Does it necessarily make it an error? It is unlikely. So it is that probably is the way I understand this query.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Sequeira, for your very informative, excellent talk. It's nice seeing you. Once again, thank you so much. Hope to see you in the campus once the pandemic settles.
Okay, thank you very much. And, again, I wish all the success for the conference and good luck to participants.
We'll move on to the next speaker of the first session, the last lecture. We have with us Dr. Gunkur Girija Shankar, currently working as Professor, Department of Biotechnology, College of Pharmaceutical Sciences, Andhra University, Visakhapatnam, India. He has his graduation, master's, and doctorate from the same university. His areas of research are mainly in pharmaceutical technology, proteomic studies, bioinformatics, bioactive metabolites from marine and terrestrial microorganisms. He has more than 27 years of experience in teaching, research, and industry. He has guided many postgraduates, that is more than 80 postgraduates and more than 23 PhD candidates. He has many publications both in national and international journals, and also the recipient of many awards at different cadres. With great pleasure, I welcome Dr. Girija Shankar to deliver his lecture. He will be speaking on protein engineering, a cutting-edge technology for biotherapeutics. Over to you, Dr. Girija Shankar.
Am I audible? Everything is okay? Right?
Yes,
Yeah,
fine.
Yeah. Right. So, thank you, Dr. Padma GM Rao, and the organizers of RACOPS ICTD 2021. And thank you for giving me this opportunity for delivering my talk on today's theme of ICTD, that is quality medicines from bench to bedside. So today I'm going to give you the lecture on protein engineering, a cutting-edge technology for biotherapeutics, because it is a little bit more related to biotechnology nowadays, which is a latest one, that is where we are going to come across this protein engineering. That is now we are just my topic contents. I'm just giving you the definitions which we are going to come across in my topic, that is, and what are the properties or functions of a protein which we can modify to get a desired protein, that is getting a new protein, and what are the basic concepts which we are just taking into, that is protein engineering is required in that one, and then protein engineering methods, and then protein engineering applications, case studies, just 6 to 7 case studies we are going to study. Then conclusions and future perspectives of my topics. So first of all, what a protein engineering is, that is. So just a definition, that is protein engineering is a modification of the protein structure with recombinant DNA technology or by chemical treatment in order to get your desirable action for better use in medicine, industry, and agriculture. So that is what today's talk, protein engineering, that is we want to just so what is this cutting edge technology? That is a technology at the frontiers of knowledge. That means reset whatever the developments which are going to be taking place in the frontiers. So these are going to be applicable to biotherapeutics. What biotherapeutics are? So biotherapeutics are the substances obtained from the biological sources to treat the diseases which are manufactured by using recombinant DNA or hybridoma technology. So now these biotherapeutics are, now we are going to have the biopharmaceutical studies. So in this case, whatever these proteins which we are going to alter, what structure, what properties or functions of the protein which we can alter in order to get a desired protein, because nowadays we are going to have a lot of problems facing with this complex structure molecules of this protein, which are having a different difficulties while they are going to be manufacturing in this biotherapeutics studies, or during the therapy also there is a lot of problems are going to face. So how we can alter the desirable function of this protein alter to get a desirable function, so that which we are going to come across, that is the properties of a protein which we can alter or which we can modify, that is. So here we are using that protein or enzyme or antibody, which we are going to come across that is. So it may be protein or an enzyme or an antibody. So sometimes it's going to enzyme engineering or antibody engineering, they are going to call it. So here we are going to say the properties which we can alter in this one is catalytic efficiency of whatever the enzyme, or we can reduce the immunogenicity, or allosteric regulation is going to be diminished, or thermal whatever the tolerance can be increased, that is, and pH stability also will be increased. So all the duration of action what we are going to have that is, and here that whatever the metal fact are going to be cofactors are going to be required. So there is no need of any cofactor while we are going to use the enzyme for its activity, where it is industrially very useful. Specific substrate binding site is also going to be used for this purpose, so that that specificity is going to be giving reducing that whatever the unwanted effects are going to be in case of enzyme. Mostly the enzymes are going to be working in aqueous conditions, but we are also going to modify the protein to whatever the enzyme to reactivity in a non-aqueous solvents also. And most of the proteins are degraded by the proteases. So how we are going to improve their protease resistance? So these are all what are the properties which we can modify for the protein. But how to get that modified protein or new protein which is going to be desired for us, that is, how we can do it means there are two ways which we can modify that protein, whatever the structure. One is by treating with a chemical treatment of the protein itself, that is. So at a protein level, you can modify its activity by treating with a chemical modification. So that means we can change its whatever the specific functional group or specific whatever the amino acid we can add or delete. But here this process is a very harsh process, and it is also non-specific, and we have to do it repeatedly for all the batches. So for that purpose, it is not possible to go for appropriate method for chemical modification of the protein. So how we are going to modify the protein is we have to modify at gene level. So that means preferably we have to manipulate the DNA sequence of that gene, cloned gene, so that we can get whatever the desired property. So how we are going to modify that gene DNA sequence in order to get your. So for that you require some basic concepts are very much essential for you. That is one is the basic concept is that is what we are. How this protein is going to be produced from the gene, that is gene to protein, which is a central dogma of the molecular biology, where we are very much essential. Here we have to clearly understand so that we can modify it. This is what we are having a transcription process, that is where we are going to prepare that from the complementary DNA strand, we are going to prepare a mRNA process. So once we are going to get this mRNA, that mRNA is going to be translated into its whatever the amino acid coding, so that we are going to get the peptide sequence, where we are going to get that whatever the polypeptide sequence. So this gene to protein is a very important, where you see in the central dogma you are going to have DNA to messenger RNA, then messenger RNA to protein. So if you want a desired protein, whatever the modified protein, so you are going to modify the DNA sequence, that is at gene level. So that is a very important aspect here. So this is, that means we are going to do some type of mutational changes in the DNA segment, so that it is going to be producing different amino acids. So these different amino acids are going to be give a different structure of the protein, where its activity is going to be altered. So once we are going to get the desired whatever the DNA, whatever the mutated DNA, then how we are going to get your protein, by which technology? That is what we are going to the other concept is recombinant DNA technology, which you are already know. But once again, we are going to say that is here, whatever the recombinant DNA technology, which we are going to apply by taking the whatever the vector, that vector is going to be introduced with this whatever the desired protein, desired DNA segment, so that it is going to be called as a recombinant DNA, which is the plasmid. Then it is going to be inserted into a eukaryotic cell or a prokaryotic cell, so that you are going to get a genetically modified organism or recombinant bacteria. So based on this type of the vector, when it is a cloning vector, you are going to get a copies of the genes of whatever the desired, whatever the genes you are going to get. If it is an expression vector, then you are going to get the expression of the specific protein which you get. So this DNA technology, recombinant DNA technology is highly used, especially in case of this whatever the protein engineering for getting in order to get your desired protein. But here that is, once we are going to get a clone genes, whatever this one, you require compulsory cell. If you require a clone gene, number of copies of that whatever the DNA segments, without using the cell, there is another technology what we are going to as a polymerase chain reaction technique, where we are going to use the PCR, that means in vitro technique, what we are going to use. So polymerase chain reaction, where we are going to have this get the number of copies of whatever the desired, whatever the mutated DNA fragments by various steps which we are going to involve, that is by denaturation of the whatever the DNA is done, and by using the primers and DNA polymerase, stack DNA polymerase, we are going to get the many million number of whatever this one within a short span of time without using this. So these three techniques are very useful, especially in case of protein engineering. That means how we are going to get a desired protein or whatever the desired function of the protein which we are going to require. So how we are going to prepare this whatever the desired protein is, that is protein engineering methods are very much essential. What are the various methods used for this one? So those protein engineering methods are, that is rational design methods, which we are going to random design methods, evolutionary methods, computational protein design, and other methods which we are going to do, that is maybe. So among this one, this is what we are going to call as site-directed mutagenesis. Rational design methods require compulsory basic knowledge of the entire protein structure and function. So then we can manipulate that protein. We can whatever by using this site-directed mutagenesis. We'll just see the diagrammatic representation. Next slide, that is the plasmid DNA, or by using the PCR, polymerase chain reaction. So this is a mostly widely used site-directed mutagenesis. In case of random design method, that is random mutagenesis, where we are going to limited information about the protein structure. So that what we are going to do, we are going to do it that mutation randomly at various regions, and then we are going to get that whatever the proteins, those proteins are going to be screened for their activity. So that is. And here another method is, that is evolutionary method, where we are going to get a library of diverse proteins where they are going to be screened. This method is DNA shuffling method. So computational protein design method is what I told you, that is it is by using the computation, whatever the molecular modeling programs and algorithms to have the relation between whatever the course of fields and that whatever the structure are going to be taking a very important role in designing this whatever the protein, molecular modeling programs and structure function relationships. There are some other methods which we can also use, that is a protein fusion method, or that is the display technologies, where we are going to get a protein-protein interactions are going to be identified by using this display methods. We are going to get a large library of diversified proteins are also getting by this. And nowadays we are having that is a humanization, that is a chimerization and monoclonal antibodies. Those are also other methods. So in this first rational method, I will just go through this how it is going to be taking place by using this recombinant DNA technology, whatever the coding sequence we want. So where we want to change that mutation, whatever the oligonucleotide with a change in mutation, we are going to take. So then it is going to be formed whatever by using this DNA polymerase engine, DNA ligase, we are going to get whatever the mutated heteroduplex complex, which we are going to insert into the bacteria by recombinant DNA technology. We are going to get a mutated DNA. So this mutated DNA now is used for the expression of that mutated protein, which is, so for this what you require is compulsory, you require what is the exact position, structure of the protein, where you are going to enter the amino acid. So this is the rational design method. And random design method is where we are having a very limited information regarding the protein. so that the protein cannot be, we don't know about its structure and function activity relationship, so that we are the gene of interest we are going to take by using this PCR amplified technique, we are mutating at different regions. So all these, whatever the mutations, we are going to convert into the plasmid, with inserted into the plasmid. We are going to get 4 different types of plasmids, so that by recombinant DNA technology, we are going to get 4 different type of proteins. Then these proteins are going to be screened for its activity, which protein is going to be desired for us. So this is a random design method. That means we are going to do serial method. And another method, that is what we are going to evolutionary method, where we are going to get a hybrid genes are going to be getting. That is homologous genes we are going to take. Restriction enzyme sites are going to be there. So with using this restriction endonucleases, we are going to get, by ligation also, we are going to get this hybrid genes. So these hybrid genes are going to give diversified proteins, and these proteins again we are going to be screened for whatever the activity. So that means it is the protein library we are going to get it in the case of it, because it is a very slow process, time consuming one. The same way, if we are going to take 2 genes, we are going to get this type of whatever the modification of genes. So these genes again we are going to check it for their activity. So these mostly whatever this one is, site-directed mutagenesis is going to be widely used for in protein engineering for determining that whatever the protein structure or whatever the specific desired activity, along with the computational protein design. So by using these general methods, how we are going to apply that is applications wise, we are going to see that. In the case of applications, we are going to see that is various applications are there. That means just the case studies I'm just giving you one by one. That is here for some drugs are going to be what are the poisonous drugs, that is like cocaine, abuse drug. When we are going to take higher dose, we are going to targeted drug neutralization. So this targeted drug neutralization is going to be done. There is a case study. Human vitropolyinesterase is going to be modified by using this computational protein design, which is going to be increasing its catalytic efficiencies almost 1390 times. That is, this is the wild type human vitropolyinesterase. Once it is engineered protein by using this computational protein by whatever the design, this whatever the specific site is going to be reserved for that one. So it is going to be specific site for the substrate binding site. Another advantage with this one is engineered protein. It is also less reactive to the acetylcholine hydrolysis also. That is also another advantage. So this is one targeted drug neutralization. Another one is just second method is what we are going to say, that is modification of catalytic activity of the enzyme. That is where we are going to sometimes possible theoretical mutations, if you are going to say in case of serine protease, where we are having, this is the serine protease, where it's actually catalytic activity due to the presence of asparagine and aspartic acid, histidine, and serine. So due to this intermolecular interactions, they are going to be causing this catalytic activity. If you change the amino acids by during this mutagenesis, it loses its activity. You see here instead of histidine, it is going to keep a phenylalanine, so that it loses its activity. Here it is instead of aspartic acid, asparagine, if you are going to use it, loses its activity. So this is another type of study we did. And another third one is that is a conjugated antibody drug conjugates. It is especially in drug targeting process. So this is one type of stimulus protein therapy, response protein therapy. So that means the drug directly releases at the site of action by using this antibody, whatever the monoclonal antibody. So the best example for this one is given, that is one type of antibody, that is trastuzumab and metacine, that is, which is used in the breast cancer, that is. So this metacine is going to be released directly in the cancer cell by conjugating with whatever this monoclonal antibody. Here the monoclonal antibody is conjugated with thioether linkages. Once the antigen is attached to this one, then it is going to form this lysosome. So in that lysosome, due to that whatever the enzymes it is degraded by this thioether linkages are going to be degraded, and the drug is going to be released. Due to this monoclonal antibody, directly reaches to the cancer cell, not anywhere else. So that is one of the advantages with this stimulus response protein therapies. So the another one is what we are having is in case of this thermostability of the protein. By adding the disulfide bonds, we are going to increase the stability of the protein. Where the best example it is T4 lysozyme, which is going to be constructed for 6 variants of that engineered protein is going to be constructed by site-directed mutagenesis. So by addition of this cysteine molecule, so that you are going to get a disulfide bonds. So in this, the 4th variant, whatever this one is going to have, that is activity is 95%, and its temperature is also that is stable up to 57.6 degrees centigrade. You see how this disulfide bridges are going to be formed. This is the native protein, and this is bonds formed. That is whatever. This is the thermostability of the protein is going to be increased by using this protein. And the next one is what we are having in case of modifying the metal cofactor required. Metal cofactor required for enzyme activity, where we are going to have the problem with this one is they are going to form chelates with inactive compounds. Actually, for the enzyme activity, the metal is required. But once they are going to be used in the industry, whatever this enzyme, especially in case of that is subtilene. Subtilizine is one of the whatever this chelate metal ion what we are going to have, that protein is going to be enzyme is going to be used, especially in a textile industry. That is so. This is subtilizine is going to be prepared by this oligonucleotide directed mutagenesis, changing the amino acid residues from 75 to 83. So at this position, if you are going to remove that one, so that it loses its high activity due to the presence of this calcium. But once we are going to remove this one, but random mutagenesis process, we are going to add at different regions some other whatever the amino acids we are going to add. It is showing low activity, but by combining all these things, we are going to get a high activity without using this cofactors. So that is the advantage with this protein engineered whatever the substance that is. So subtilizine is one of the examples which it is given, genetic engineering of calcium independent subtilizine. So there is another application what we are having is in this one is changing the asparagine to other amino acids. So especially this asparagine and glutamine amino acids are going to lead some type of degradation process are going to be taking place once they are going to be present in the protein. So once we are going to change those amino acids so that they are going to become thermally resistant and the duration of action is also going to be. One good example that is given is that human insulin. In case of this human insulin, that is, in the case of this A chain, this is the A chain and this is the B chain, that is in human insulin. In the A chain, here we are going to have this A21 position, that whatever the asparagine which is going to be present, it is going to be replaced with the glycine. That is one. And in the B chain, at 31 and 32 positions, here, if you are going to add 2 arginine molecules. So the last one, actually, this is the glargine insulin. So this glargine insulin now, which is having a long-acting insulin, which a long-acting insulin, and which is a clearly solid insulin. So that is how we are going to get, that is by changing the asparagine to other amino acids leads to the duration of action is going to be increased. The other one is what we are having in case of the increasing the enzyme activity. Enzyme activity, catalytic activity is going to be increased by modified direct mutagenesis by, first of all, you should know about the geometry of its active site. Once you know the geometry of active sites, that means by using this protein, whatever the CPD model, that is computational protein design, so you can clearly check that whatever the amino acid if you are going to check, that amino acid if you are going to leave it. That is one example for this one is thyrosyl tRNA synthetase. This is the amino acylation of what in case of this translation process. So thus thyrosyl tRNA synthetase activity is going to be increased by replacing the threonine at 51 position with either alanine or proline. So here the alanine at a 51 position is going to be keep it, its catalytic activity is 3200 times. Whereas if it is proline at 51 position, its activity is going to be increased by 95,800 times. So that means how the enzyme activity, increasing the enzyme. This is all by doing this by changing at G level by directed mutagenesis. So these are just various case studies which we are going to come across. That is, there are other methods are also there which we are going to, but whatever this one is given in this one. So with this, what we are going to say, that is the our conclusions with respect to that one is here. The very important thing is by advances in the recombinant DNA technology and high throughput screening techniques and that old technologies like proteomics or whatever the metabolomics, which made that whatever the protein engineering methods are more improvised. That is, they are very useful for the companies. So these advances in recombinant DNA and simultaneously these biotherapeutics, whatever these are, their activity are going to be enhanced. That is what is enhancement of activity of biotherapeutics by what? By reducing the immunogenicity issues, that by altering the pharmacokinetic parameters like duration of action or whatever the biological half-life is going to be increased and resistant to cellular proteases. So that is the stability parameters. So all these will give that biological activity of this biotherapeutics have been increased by using this protein engineering method. But still we are having the whatever the problems. That means in case of challenges, whatever this one is in the protein engineering is, the very important thing is protein molecular recognition is going to be one of the important challenging problems. That is, so this is now the computer, whatever the computational protein designing by using this algorithms, molecular modeling techniques, and then by determining the force field strengths and structure activity relationships, the proteins are going to be created by in silico model, and then they are going to get a more number of proteins, and then they are going to be tested statistically, and then structure activity relationships are going to be identified. And next, the challenging, that is what we in the first case we have discussed, that is stimulus responsive for target activation, that is which we are going to, it is now the formulations also, hydrogels are also going to be using for this, especially this is one of the challenging one for stimulative response for target activation. And then flexible backbone protein design, that is especially the protein design, whatever that one is, how we are going to be flexibly changed in order to get your desired protein with a whatever the desired activity that is. So for this, computational protein designs are going to be now widely coming up, and again it is because the proteins are highly complex molecules. It's very difficult for us. So till the research is going on for this one. So this is what we are having in case of protein engineering, which is a cutting-edge technology for biotherapeutics. So these are the references which we are going to give, and thank you very much for patient listening and for giving me this opportunity. I thank the organizers for especially College of Pharmaceutical Sciences and Dr. Bhumendra and his team for arranging such a wonderful webinar for us. Thank you very much. And any queries, welcome. Hello, madam. Am I audible?
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Dr. Girija Shankar, for your excellent talk, a topic of recent interest and also the current interest, and which is a very complex topic. And I'm sure that the audience must have enjoyed because you made it so simple. Can't see any questions from the audience, maybe because the topic is so complex. I don't know how many are there in the biotechnology specialization.
Yeah.
Just one question from my side. What is
Yes,
the
yes, madam.
significant role of protein engineering in the
Yeah.
vaccine development?
Yeah, that is what we are having there. The antibodies, whatever the conjugation, antibody conjugation, that is one protein engineering aspect, because the structure of the antibody, which we are going to be very, very essential for modifying how it is going to be attached to the antigen antibody reaction, which is a very, very important for us. So at which place, whether it is acting at a FC region or FAB region. So how it is going to be attaching to that antigen is one of the very, very important.
Okay. Are you collaborating with any of these industries like Serum Institute or anywhere where the vaccine developments are going on?
Yeah. Not at, madam. Actually, we are doing. We are doing at a primitive stage of one of my. I will show my one of the paper which we have just. Madam, is it visible, the screen? Madam?
Yes,
Okay.
visible.
Yeah, but purification and characterization stuff.
No, it's not visible. I think you are showing something. No, not visible.
I'll just share this. Show my screen. So,
Yes.
yeah, no? Right?
Yeah, visible.
Yes. Madam, this is actually a purification, characterization, and structuralization of one ceralcin, that is Serratia peptidase enzyme. We have isolated from a novel source. This is a alkaline metalloprotease. Actually, the structure was elucidated. Now we are searching for that is what is the major active site from our metalloprotease that we are doing that research in our laboratory.
Okay, so it is at the bench side you have started.
Yeah, bench side we are in there, but still we are going for the computational protein design and everything.
Okay. And also you were talking about the biotherapeutics,
Yes.
area which you are taking. Is there any specific diseases where you are concentrating other than cancer?
No, madam. We are not actually with any of the diseases that is a pharmacy practice oriented. We are mainly involved in the research with isolating and purifying the proteins only, that is, from microbial source or from the novel sources.
Okay.
Any question, madam? Any question, madam?
Just. Does protein engineering have a role in stem cell technology?
Yeah. But that is protein engineering means what we are having. The stem cell technology means what we are going to have is. So whatever that cells which are, because now it is libraries we are going to be constructing. That is what evolution method. I told you one evolution method where we are going to construct a different type of proteins which are going to be involved in this case of cell lines. That is.
Okay. So there is one more question. Is protein engineering helping in modifying hereditary diseases?
Hereditary diseases means it is not, madam, that is protein engineering, because we have to, that is what we are going for this stem cell, whatever the stem cell therapy, that is. We cannot modify that whatever the hereditary diseases, but by using this gene therapy, now it is growing. But protein engineering, in that case, it is not possible. I think so, that is. But
Okay.
Anything, madam? Right?
No. There are no other questions. So, okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Because there are no other questions now. And thank you so much for a topic which you made it very simple. And this is an upcoming area where I am sure that you will be able to expand your bedside research to bedside and moving to pharmaceutical industry collaborations, and you can go in a big sale. So all the best from my side. Thank you once again for your excellent talk. and also accepting
Madam.
our invitation and joining us for the conference. Thank you
Yes,
so much.
madam. One minute, madam. Just I want to
Please.
say, thank you very much for Dr. Bhumendra and his organizing team for continuously, meticulously they are planned for this program and continuously monitoring for each and every updates. Really, it is a wonderful job done by Dr. Bhumendra and his team. And I also, thanks to my senior, Dr. KVRNS Ramesh, who is a faculty of your college, so who introduced me to the RAC College of Pharmaceutical Sciences. So in this opportunity that he gave me the opportunity. Thank you very much, Dr. KVRNS Ramesh. Also that is. Right?
Okay,
Thank
okay.
you.
Some of them are listening, and I am also very happy to say that I have got a very young, energetic, and excellent team who really do lot of work, hard work,
Yes.
very proactive, and that's
Yes.
why our RAC College of Pharmaceutical Sciences is coming up, not only in the teaching but also in research.
Right.
So once again, thank you for participating.
Yeah.
If you get any chance, come this side whenever there
Okay,
is
yeah.
any conference or anything, once COVID subsides.
Yeah, right.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank
I
you.
wish, Dr. Bhumendra, thank you very much. I wish the conference